The first principle is do not fool yourself. The problem is you are the easiest person to fool. That's not an original quote. I stole that from the scientist Richard Feynman, and he was talking about science itself. And in a way, I think it frames nicely the story I'm going to tell you, because it involves a fool, it involves an awful lot of science, and at the conclusion, I'll offer a hypothesis that I hope we can test together. So let's start with the fool. You're looking at him. I come from a family of public educators, and I've been advocating in education for the last decade. And when I started that work, I held an awful lot of ideas about how I thought education ought to take place and how I thought students ought to learn. You may have heard some of these ideas. In fact, some of them are still popular today. They're ideas like the student should be in charge of their own learning. Ideas like we should match the style of delivery of instruction to the preferred learning style of the student. I advocated for these ideas because I believed then that they sounded right and good. Even now, they do, to me. But interestingly enough, in the work that I did and the work that I do, I've had the opportunity to see how they play out in practice. It was a day where I went to visit a school in Washington, D.C., where the students came in every morning, stared at a screen that gave them their playlist of what they were supposed to do that day. Hopefully, most of you are old enough to remember iPods and playlists. And they looked at that screen and they were told, Yasmin, you're supposed to go read. Joaquin, you're supposed to go listen to this online. And what I watched that day horrified me, because most of them weren't learning. And when I went over and talked to the teacher and said, well, what are you going to do about this? She said, there's nothing I can do. I can't give them feedback because I'm not in charge anymore. The people who design that have all the best intentions in the world. I know that because I've worked with them. The problem is that the ideas that they have are fooling themselves into thinking that learning's taking place. At the same time that I was witnessing this in person, I just happened to start reading a book written by a teacher in the United Kingdom. Her name is Daisy Christodoulou. And in that book, Daisy describes how, as a teacher, she was frustrated to discover, long into her career, that there was a body of knowledge that would help her understand how to teach, and specifically how students learn. I'm going to call it the science of learning. The technical term for it is cognitive science, the study of how our minds work. And she expressed this deep frustration that no one had ever bothered to tell her this when she was being prepared to become a teacher. And I literally remember sitting on my couch reading that and going, we have got so many challenges in our education system, but that we can address. That's what led me to work with a number of leaders around the United States of America who want to improve the way we prepare teachers. The organization is called Deans for Impact. The name is really deceptive. We work with deans of schools of education who want to have impact and want to have impact in the way that they prepare teachers once they go in the classroom. The very first thing we did as an organization was to put out a short publication. We tried again to make the title really deceptive, The Science of Learning. It's just 6 pages long. 6 questions about how students learn, about how they understand new ideas, about how they transfer their ideas in new situations. And importantly, we wrote this with a cognitive scientist and a teacher working together so that there would be actual practical applications for educators. I have to tell you that this continues to be one of the biggest drivers of interest in the work that we do at Deans for Impact. And it's not just domestically, it's all over the globe. But in our work, we were very interested in trying to figure out what would it take to spread these ideas into the schools of education that prepare our future teachers. Now, one model of looking at that would be just give them a course. But interestingly enough, one of the powers of cognitive science is that it says just making people listen to things is not necessarily the most effective way to lead to learning. Anybody who's taught is nodding along. So we set out on a project at Deans for Impact to see if we could get these ideas understood and spread, and we went to look at 18 different programs that prepare teachers in the United States. And in the course of doing that, we saw something interesting. We found in many cases that there were teachers who were going into the classroom unprepared, and they would admit as much. But in a few instances, we found programs that were preparing teachers who seemed to be light years ahead in their professional confidence, in their understanding of what it was going to take once they stepped into the classroom. They were professionals. And when we looked at what those programs were doing, we were surprised and in some ways gratified to find that the individual principles that apply in cognitive science to how individuals learn seem to apply at the organizational level of how you prepare a future teacher. We've synthesized those findings in a publication called, and it's a little bit more unwieldy, The Building Blocks of Effective Educator Preparation. And there are 4 of them: modeling, feedback, practice, and alignment. I don't have time to go in depth with all of them, but I'm going to go through quickly a couple of the core components. When we talk about modeling in the context of preparing a future teacher, we're saying that we want them to see an excellent master mentor teacher modeling the sort of pedagogy that we want to see in the classroom. But it's not enough just to give them the opportunity to see it. You have to be intentional and create opportunities for those novice teachers to have the opportunity to ask the expert, why did you do that? What was behind your decision making when you made that instructional move in your classroom? Practice. When we talk about practice in the context of preparing a future teacher, all too often we saw the idea that take some coursework, off you go into the classroom and good luck. The student teaching experience was not designed intentionally. In contrast, the programs that were preparing effective educators were incredibly thoughtful about creating opportunities to practice specific skills with the opportunity to get guidance from those master mentor teachers about what they wanted to do. Practice means actually getting opportunities in no-stakes situations before you're turned over to a classroom, which can be terrifying. The programs that integrate practice into every step of the preparation of future teachers have teacher candidates who are getting ready to go into their career who are far more confident and ready than those who just gave them a few weeks of student teaching at the end of the course of their experience. Feedback. Feedback is vitally important to learning, but not all feedback is equivalent. When we were visiting programs that prepare teachers in the United States, we saw a lot of feedback that fell in the category of good job or try harder. That sort of feedback is not actionable. It doesn't tell a future teacher what it is they need to work on. And maybe most importantly, it doesn't give them the opportunity to practice and go back and do it again. Good feedback has to be specific. It has to be task-focused, and there has to be an opportunity to learn from the feedback you've been provided. This brings me to the 4th and final building block, and it's the most complicated one: alignment. In the United States of America today, we have a tragedy going on. And that tragedy is that the preparation of future teachers is not aligned between what's happening in the schools of education and in the elementary and secondary schools where the practice-based teaching education is taking place. Over and over again, we would see a teacher candidate, a future teacher, being told one thing by their faculty in a school of education and something completely different by the teacher in the classroom that they were doing their student teaching in. That's almost worse than getting no feedback at all, because you're asking a novice to lead their own learning. And just like those students in that classroom I saw that day in Washington, D.C., it is confusing if you are getting conflicting feedback. The good news is that in more than a handful of programs, there is intentionality and thought about how to align what it is that programs and schools are expecting teachers to be able to do by the time they go in the classroom. The same way we have those same expectations for medical professionals, we need to have those same expectations for teaching professionals. And there are examples out there where it's happening. And they are inspiring, they are exciting, and we need to spread them. So, how do we do that? Well, if you'll forgive the self-serving nature of this, the Science of Learning document that I mentioned is available on the Deans for Impact website. So too is the building blocks of effective educator preparation, which will show you some of the examples that I'm talking about in action where it's taking place. But here's my hypothesis, and it's just a hypothesis. The principles of learning that take place for individuals, the principles of learning that take place for future educators, they apply to all of us in the context in which we live and work. So my charge to you today, if you're interested, is to think about what sort of behaviors do you model in your personal and professional experiences? What sort of intentionality do you have in the feedback that you provide those who you may be mentoring or caring about? What opportunities do you have for your kids, for your students, for people you care about, to practice before they give something in a high-stakes situation? And most of all, how do you think about aligning the goals that you have across all of the activities in whatever you may be participating in, with your family, with wherever you work, with those that you care about? That's the untested hypothesis of learning science. I hope you'll think about testing it with me. Thank you.